Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I want to go over 5 different weapons and weapon ideas that I think would be cool additions for New World. Now for this list, I wanted to stay away from weapons that have been data mined for the most part, and a lot of these are just ideas I had that I thought would be really cool to have added into New World at some point, and that I think would fit the aesthetic and gameplay of New World. And these aren't really in a specific order, I just numbered them so it's easier to follow. So at number 5, we have the greatsword or the longsword. Now this is the only one that is a data mined weapon that is in a list of weapons in the files of the game, and that is the longsword. And there is also a picture or some concept art of a character in the game using a big two-handed sword, and I think that's even one of the pictures on the official website for the game. So we're gonna be getting a two-handed sword at some point, but I'm not sure if it's gonna be called a greatsword or a longsword, if those are going to be separate weapons that maybe will both be released at some point. But a big two-handed sword is easily one of the most wanted and requested weapons for New World. It would most likely be a faster swinging weapon than both the Warhammer and the Great Axe. It would most likely be the faster version, and the Great Axe would be medium, the Warhammer would be slow. It would most likely be more about slashing attacks, cone attacks, maybe something like whirlwinds, and probably have some debuffs added in, like maybe some bleeds. All that type of stuff really fits in with a big two-handed sword and still really fits the aesthetic of the game. And at number 4, I have an elephant gun, or more specifically something like a nitro express rifle. And if you don't know what these were actually first made in the late 1800s and were, as the name suggests, used for hunting elephants or other big game animals. And it's a rifle that has an extremely large cartridge and is more akin to more modern weapons like anti-material rifles. And my idea overall with this weapon is that it's a very hard-hitting weapon at range, but also incredibly slow to use and heavy, so it has a side effect of if you have it out, you would have a movement penalty. And I think there could be some really cool gameplay around having this really heavy weapon with a really slow reload time that hits very hard for that one shot, and you would have to play around either not using it for the rest of your fight and using your other weapon, or somehow getting enough distance to be able to reload this weapon. And then it could also have the effect of, since it's super heavy, since it's a somewhat decently accurate rifle, it would be pretty easy to hit and could possibly have some maybe hit scan effect or just a much more accurate shot. Because with the current musket in New World, it reloads extremely quickly. You have like a 1 second or less than 1 second reload time. Normally muskets in games would be the super slow firing, longer range weapons if it's in this time period, because muskets in real life take much longer to reload. So having this type of really high caliber weapon still fits in with the aesthetic and time period of the game, but also gives a different variation on that long range rifle. And at number 3, I have a magical shield. And my idea with this is that it would be scaling off of intelligence and be more focused on using magical attacks and protecting your group as a whole instead of just yourself. Now, I'm not exactly certain how something like this could be implemented into the game. I know a lot of people have talked about wanting the one-handed mace to be an additional thing that you can use with the shield, and that could be scaled off of intelligence and make that weapon more of a paladin-esque weapon, so it can be more magical focused, scale with intelligence, be used with a shield, and fill that kind of protection paladin role. And I do think that's a good idea and could fill in this role, but more of my idea is to make it almost like more of a battle mage-esque weapon and have its attacks be fully scaled with intelligence, and like I said, more focused on protecting your allies with different magical effects or buffs. And like I said, not sure exactly how this would go, what other weapon could be used with it. Maybe they could turn the shield itself into the weapon and have just like another weapon paired with it with animations, but the shield be the main focus of the skill tree. Not certain, but I think that type of playstyle would be really cool, would give another variation on the tank that's a little bit more focused on supporting your team and less about being just a shield wall to take all of the aggro and damage for the group. And it could also have something to be able to block spell effects, reduce magical damage taken, and be kind of like a counter to magical effect, like how the normal shield right now is kind of a counter to non-magical attacks. And at number 2, I have fist weapons, or alternatively some sort of magical fist weapon. Now for fist weapons, I'm thinking of other RPGs that have like brawler classes or these melee focused classes that have some sort of fist weapon. Like World of Warcraft has actual fist weapons. Something like Diablo has classes like this, where they're using some sort of weapon they put on their fists to make them a class that uses their fists for all of their attacks, and more like kind of a monk type of playstyle. Now with New World having magic and all this stuff, I think having just some of like magical fist weapons that is still focused as a like physical damage dealer, that they could just use magic to get around it not fitting the aesthetic of the game as much, or they could just have something as a full magical fist weapon that you just use magic to kind of cover your fists in something to be able to use your fists as this new weapon. Something like that, something in that archetype, I think is a really cool archetype in RPG games, and I think they could very easily make it work in New World and give a different type of play style. It would most likely be more blunt damage stuff, more knockdowns, more stuns, but you'd have to be very, very close. You really wouldn't have much range at all. You could have more attacks that kind of lunge you at the targets and keep you in that really close range as a brawler. And depending on how they would introduce something like this, they could potentially have something like knuckle dusters as one of the weapon tiers for this. And if they were going to do kind of using magic to create these things, they could just have some magical knuckle dusters and it would still fit in the world pretty decently and give a unique playstyle that really isn't in the game right now. And then at number 1, I have a melee focused healing weapon. Now I think this is a really cool idea that a lot of games don't use. It's usually left to like a hybrid class with paladins, or some games will have clerics having melee attacks and being more in melee range. But my overarching idea with this is whatever weapon this would be, if it would just be some magically generated weapon, kind of how the gauntlets are, that you would be in melee with all the time. So the basic attacks, the heavy attacks, they would all be melee attacks, so you'd have to be in melee with them, but then all of your skills would be tied to having radius heals around you and having your heavy and light attacks somehow tie into your healing. So maybe you could do healing off auto attacks, kind of like how Bridget in Overwatch is. And if you don't know that character, essentially every time she auto attacks enemies, she procs a heal over time that stays on her, so things around her get healed while it's active. And that could be something with this, and then have other heals or buffs that only work in a radius around her. And I think this could really help in New World, because especially say if you're on boss fights in PvE, or if you're in big war fights, big PvP fights, pretty much all the melee are going to be very tightly clumped up in New World. That's just kind of how it is, how the attacks work. So having a healing weapon that is focused with being up with the melee in melee range, this could serve as a pretty unique and powerful healer for those situations, for those more melee stack groups. And I do think a melee healing weapon like this would have a bit higher of a skill ceiling than something like the life staff right now, because you would have to position yourself correctly in all of these fights. So you could potentially have a higher top end effect than the life staff, but you have to put yourself in these more dangerous situations, being in melee, being up with the melee fighters, possibly getting hit a lot more, but then you have that possibility of having a stronger effect, or stronger heals, or stronger buffs. So I think that's a really good trade-off with some more skill involvement. So that's some of the weapons that I think would be really good additions for New World. Like I said, all of these besides the longsword have not been data mined. There's no information talking about anything like these. These were just ideas I had for weapons that I thought would be cool additions to the game and could create some really unique play styles and new gameplay into New World. So subscribe if you want to see more New World or other MMO videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about these weapon possibilities, and thanks for watching.